Do you have something important coming up in the next 7 days? You can leverage traditional electional astrology to help maximize the chances of success for whatever venture that you're launching. In this video, I will give an overview of the astrology of 15th to 20th of June 2026 and an overview of the alignments that we want to emphasize and de-emphasize this week. And I'll also go through all the rising signs to show you which times are possible to use around this time of the month astrologically. And finally, I'll go through a list of the best times of the next week that you can use to really maximize your chance of a positive outcome with whatever important thing that you're doing, whether it's studying for an exam, signing up for a new program, scheduling a doctor's appointment, asking someone out on a date, or booking a time to get your hair cut. So, traditional electional astrology is based on the principle that the events going on Earth reflect the positions of the planets in the sky based on an animistic view of the universe that says there is a connection between everything in the universe, and therefore when the planets are aligned in a positive fashion, it portends that whatever we start around the same time is going to have a positive outcome. So let's get into the astrology of next week. So the main thing that we want to avoid during this time is the Venus-Pluto opposition. So Venus is leaving its auspicious conjunction with Jupiter in Cancer, and it's moving into the sign of Leo, but straight away it's going to build up to an opposition with Pluto in Aquarius, and that will go exact at around 5 degrees on Wednesday, the 17th of June. And so this is going to bring up disturbing, manipulative, and controlling relationship dynamics and a tension between, humanistic and self-centered worldviews. And that's something we don't want to emphasize in our elections. And the second thing is that Mercury is now in its shadow period. It's building up to a retrograde in the sign of Cancer that's going to start at the end of the month. But the degrees that Mercury is now in, it will have to return to during its retrograde. So that tells us that mercurial things that we do around this time, whether it's communication, technology, or commercial based, might have to be revisited and fixed during the retrograde period. Some of the best things that we want to highlight of next week are that Jupiter will be going through the final degrees of Cancer in its own decan in that sign. And so we really want to maximize our last remaining weeks having that planet in its sign of exaltation, really uplifting our sense of hope and optimism when it comes to our roots, the people close to us, and our sense of nurturing and community and things like that. It is receiving an overcoming square from Saturn, so that is kind of getting in the way and disrupting some of Jupiter's significations, but they're quite far apart by degree now. And we're just leaving the new moon in Gemini behind, which has started us on a new lunar cycle. So in the first few days of the week, the moon is going to have quite little light, but it's going to be building up in intensity. So the power of the moon to fuel our elections is going to be a little muted in the first few days, but we're going to build up to the first quarter phase of the lunar cycle by the end of the week, which is one of the best times of the month to start things and launch new ventures. So let's go through the usable rising signs of next week, starting at sunrise. Our first rising sign will be Gemini, and this is potentially usable but not great. The ascendant ruler would be Mercury in Cancer, and that would place it in the second house, which is a dark house and can't see the ascendant. And also, because Mercury is now in its shadow phase, it's moving quite slowly. So I don't love having a ruler that's moving slow and in a dark house, so I'd probably skip Gemini rising unless you have something you have to do around that time. It's not going to be one of the worst rising signs, but there's definitely better options out there. Cancer rising will be one of the rising signs we want to utilize next week because that allows us to put the exalted Jupiter in Cancer, which will be co-present with Mercury, in the first house. And that will mean that the uplifting, exalting, and confirming properties of Jupiter are going to be directly associated with us and whatever we're launching. Leo rising, we still can't use because Mars, although it's moved into the later degrees of Taurus, is still overcoming the first house by a superior square. We don't have an angular malefic during the daytime, especially when there's nothing really super positive outweighing it in any of the other angular houses. And Venus, which is going to be in the first house, is going to be opposing Pluto, and putting that angular would really, amp up the loudness of those potentially manipulative relationship dynamics that are going on at this time. And Virgo rising will be one of the rising signs we have to use. It's not perfect, but the ascendant ruler Mercury will be in the fortunate 11th house. Mercury, as with Gemini rising, is going to be moving quite slowly, and whatever you start at that time might need to be revisited at a later point. But given that the options that we have, Virgo rising is not a bad option. Libra rising, we don't want to use. It would put Saturn fallen in Aries in the 7th house, directly opposing whatever we want to begin. And Scorpio rising would be ruled by Mars in its detriment in Taurus, directly opposing and aggravating the ascendant by whole sign opposition. Sagittarius rising, if you have something to do around that time of the day, you could use it, but it's not an electional sign that I'd recommend because the ascendant ruler Jupiter is going to be in the 8th house, which can, one, it's a dark house. Jupiter will struggle to guide the results of the election. And secondly, the 8th house can bring a lot of, mental anguish and suffering and issues that can preoccupy the ascendant ruler. And then we come to the Saturn ruled signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, and those will be, unfortunately, for the next 2 years, ruled by Saturn fallen in Aries, and we don't want a fallen malefic as our ascendant ruler. And that brings us to Pisces rising, which will be one of the best rising signs still of the coming week, because it's ruled by exalted Jupiter in Cancer that can see it from a favorable trine aspect from the joyous 5th house. Aries rising and Taurus rising we want to skip because that would put, in both cases, that would put a malefic in the 1st house, suggesting that there's going to be issues with us and whatever we're launching at that time. All right, let's get into our first chart of next week, which is going to be on the 16th of June, which is a Tuesday. And I've saved the very best chart of the next 7 days till the end of this video if you want to check that out. So this chart will be at around 11:39 a.m. in your location, but the time doesn't matter so much as the ascendant degree. So just adjust the chart until you have around 10 degrees of Virgo rising. And the chart should look something like this with the planetary hour of the moon. So in this chart, Mercury is our ascendant ruler, and it's placed in the 11th house, which is associated with like building up to the 10th house, like your hopes, aspirations, dreams, etc. The people that support you, like your fan base, your audience. And it's also like groups of peers, people who are ranked similarly to you. So that can be like your peers in your career space, your peers academically, and so on. And it's also like your social circles, your friendship circles, any groups or communities that you are a part of. And generally, it's seen as a very positive house. And what I love is this chart setup places Jupiter, exalted Jupiter, in the 11th house as well. So that's helping to affirm our ascendant ruler's significations. And Jupiter is said to rejoice in the 11th house because it's the planet of optimism and hope, and being placed in a house that is, about building up our dreams and, moving them towards fruition. Those really kind of synergize with each other. And on this day, the significations of Mercury and Jupiter in Cancer are being drawn down by the moon, which is in its own domicile and is applying very closely to Mercury. And so, Mercury in Cancer is very much about emotionally in tune language, supportive and sweet words, caring words, and so on. So with the moon there, I just think that's a lovely conjunction. The moon doesn't have a lot of light at this stage in the month. It's still quite dark. It's a small crescent moon, but I just think that the sign dignity and everything like that is so lovely. We do need to be aware that Mercury will, go on to station in this sign. So whatever you start at this moment, just be aware It's not our best chart, and if you use it, you might have to revisit this in July. And the second thing is the moon's last aspect was a whole sign square from Saturn, so it might still be carrying some of those restrictions and delays that aspect portends. But overall, I'd say this is a good chart for anything social. Jupiter is also ruling the 7th house of our, one-on-one relations in general. This is a good social chart. So if you have to like host a social event with a group of people, if you need to reach out to your community or an organization that you're part of, if you want to gain an audience for something that you've been working on and so on, you could definitely use these charts. And, Mercury is ruling the 10th house as well, which contains the sun in its own decan in Gemini. So for, overall like public reception for whatever you're doing at this time, this chart isn't bad either. Just be aware that if you do something involving other people, that Venus-Pluto opposition is building at this point. So that is going to seep into any relationship dynamics, and you might find like struggles with control or manipulation or challenges like that. So now we're going to move on to a series of charts on the 21st of June, Sunday, the first of which will be at around 8 minutes past midnight and 12 degrees of Pisces rising, which will give you the planetary hour of the sun. So this chart allows us to use Jupiter as our ascendant ruler in the 5th house, and it's being supported by the moon in Virgo in the 7th. And that moon is applying quite closely to a sextile with Mercury. Not only that, the moon is in Mercury's sign and Mercury is in the moon sign, which means they have mutual reception and creates a very strong linkage between the 7th and 5th houses. So this means that this chart is great for topics that combine the significations of the moon and Mercury, and also those that can combine the significations of the 5th and 7th houses. So for the latter, it's things like working with a partner on a creative project, or signing a contract and going into collaboration with someone on something creative. Just being aware that Mercury is going to go retrograde, right? So any contracts we sign at this time might need to be redone during the retrograde time. But remember, retrogrades aren't always like having to redo something isn't always the worst thing that could happen with your election. There are definitely like much worse things, like an affliction by a malefic, which can make something fall apart entirely. So yeah, just something to bear in mind. Or it could be if you need to do something with your partner to do with your kids, and you need them to be like supportive of the outcome for your child, then that could work as well. And the 7th house, the house of partnership, the 5th house, the house of dating. This could be a good time if you want to go on a date with someone, or go out for a good time with your partner. Venus, which is the general signifier of relationships, has moved 4 degrees away from its opposition with Pluto at this point, but it is still operative by sign, and Venus is in the 6th house here. So maybe not the best for relationship outcomes, but there's definitely something interesting going on there. And then in terms of Mercury Moon, like mutual reception between the planets, this could also be a good time for like supportive and emotionally grounded communication. Any communication to do with like taking care of bodily needs or nurturing needs, or supporting people in need, that kind of thing. And then on the same day, we have another chart at 6:06 a.m., around 4 degrees of Cancer rising in the hour of the sun on Sunday. So this gives us the moon now as the ascendant ruler in the 3rd house in Virgo, and that mutual reception between Mercury and the moon has now shifted to the 1st and 3rd houses. So in this instance, there's going to be a strong connection between, or you can leverage the strong connection between whatever you're doing and the 3rd house. So communication, studying, education, things to do with your neighborhood, your siblings, if you need to talk to them, do something with them, or any relatives outside of your nuclear family. If you need to start learning a language, or if you need to work on your daily routine and rituals and like organizing your time, those are all ways you can play into the 3rd house. Just being aware that if it is something communication based, then Mercury is moving pretty slowly and it's stationing retrograde 8 days from now. So that is going to feed into any communication topics. And then the things I said about Mercury Moon are also the case here. So supportive and grounded language and communication. And also, this sextile between a water and earth sign, it's very nurturing. If you had something to do, like take care of small animals or small plants, I feel like this election can also work quite well as well because of the Moon Mercury mutual reception. And then our last chart for that day is going to be at 12:06 p.m., which is a more usable time of day. And this will give us Virgo rising with around 20 degrees. And it will be the planetary hour of Jupiter, with the moon in the first house. And at this stage, it's separating from a sextile with Jupiter, and it will apply as it crosses the sign boundary to a square with the sun in Cancer. So in this chart, Mercury is ruling the first house. It's also ruling the moon, and the mutual reception it has with the moon is now between the 11th and first houses. So in this case, this could be good for doing something social, creating a strong connection between you and a group of like-minded or similarly qualified or people with a similar background to you. If you want to communicate something to a group of people or an audience, if you want to do something where you are like at the center or like highly involved in a community or an organization, or if you want to record something, write something down, or journal to do with your hopes, aspirations, and plans for the future. Those would all be great uses of this chart. And now we come to the very best chart of next week, which will be on Wednesday, the 17th of June at around 54 minutes past midnight, and adjust the chart to get 23 degrees of Pisces rising and the planetary hour of the moon. So this chart is similar to our previous Pisces rising one, but in this instance, the moon is still in Cancer and it's exactly conjoined Jupiter. So it's so lovely to have the moon in its own domicile and also conjunct a exalted benefic. So unlike the previous chart, we don't have that mutual reception between the 5th and 7th anymore. So this is going to be more focused on like pure fifth house significations. And I think Cancer is such a fertile sign, and the 5th house is to do with sexuality and children. So if you're planning to have a child and you want to conceive, this could be a good conception chart. It might not be so good for anything romantic or dating based because Venus is still applying to Pluto at this point. But if you want to do something creative, artistic, performance based, music based, this could be a great time. And also, if you need to like take care of someone or take care of anything, could be children or things that you treat like children, like small animals, for example, this is a great time to nurture them. And Mercury placed there is ruling the 4th house, and the moon is also the general significator of home and our foundations and family and our roots. So if you needed to do something related to those topics or like self-nurturing, self-care, this is a great time to start it. And this might actually be our last Jupiter-Moon conjunction, I think, before Jupiter changes signs and moves into Leo. We do just need to be aware with our Pisces rising charts and our Cancer rising charts where we're really highlighting these Cancer planets, that Saturn in Aries is overcoming them by superior square in terms of whole sign aspects. So there might be some delays and disruptions from that Saturn. They're quite far away by degree now, but that aspect is still operative. So in this chart, for example, it could create like financial barriers to whatever you're trying to do at this moment. All right, so that's our final and best chart of next week. And if you'd like a personalized electional reading, because this works best when we look at your chart, which planets we want to highlight and emphasize in your chart, and also like which positive and negative transits do you currently have going on, and how do we want to work around those. To maximize your chances of a positive outcome, you really do need to tailor it to your natal chart. And also, the type of election we use can really vary depending on the event that you're depending on the thing that you're trying to do at the time. You know, a chart for a marriage would look very different to a chart for launching a business, for example. So if you'd like a personalized reading, you can check out my website, mirabelleturner.com, and select the lucky dates option, where you can book a time to sit down one-on-one with me, and I'll offer you a selection of charts based on your natal chart, based on the thing that you're electing and the time frame that you're working with. And you know, if it's like a marriage chart, for example, it can also be tailored to both people's chart in combination. So check out that if you're interested, and I wish you all the best and the highest success with using these charts next week. I'll be back again around next weekend to share more charts. So take care, and I'll see you again next time.